What's going on, everyone? Hockey time here. Hope you guys are all having a good one. Just wanted to throw out a quick video of kind of my recap of the trade deadline. I wanted to just talk about some of the more notable deals of the past week and really the last couple weeks, and then go through who I think my winners and losers are. Hopefully, I'm not repeating the same thing you guys are hearing from literally everyone else that's doing this type of video. That plus all the panels today that we're going through their winners and losers. So hopefully something a little bit different, a little fun for you guys. But mostly just wanted to recap some of the bigger deals so that if you only have a couple minutes to really see who all got moved, this is hopefully your place to go. So, in no particular order, going to go through again some of the bigger ones. There will be some deals left off this. So, if you're a fan of some of those teams that really didn't make a huge move, apologies in advance. But let's jump right into it again. No particular order. Some of these are more organized than others. So, the first one I have here is Capo Kakinen to the Devils for Vitek Vanacek and a seventh round pick. I think this is fine for New Jersey. Again, Kakinen on an expiring deal. So, you may or may not lose him in the offseason, but you get rid of Vanacek and his contract, which is a bit hefty for the performance he was giving, obviously. And then obviously that seventh round pick is not nothing, but it's pretty inconsequential. So I don't hate this from Tom Fitzgerald. It's really the only move that I don't hate that he made today. I guess the Colin Miller one wasn't really bad either, but frankly, this was the only of their quote big moves today that didn't have me completely wondering what he was shooting for. Next, just going to kind of run through all the Vegas ones, and they for sure made the biggest splash at this deadline. Surprise, surprise, they always find a way to. So the biggest move they made, of course, is the Tomas Hertl deal. They acquire Hertl and a 2025 and 2027 third round pick for 2025's first, and David Edstrom, who was their first round pick last year. Obviously, Hartle's still hurt, so he should be back in time for playoffs, hopefully, for these guys. But this is a huge, huge piece. This is a massive piece from San Jose who has good size, good speed, not afraid to play in the corners, a pretty decent 200-foot player here. And this helps Vegas a lot. I think one of the only areas they're really weak is kind of down the middle. It's Eichel Stevenson as their 1-2. It's not bad. It's far from the worst in the league, just having Jack Eichel alone. But adding Tomas Hertl is huge for them. This is a player that probably Boston was looking at for some good time. And I didn't really hear rumblings about them looking at him, but I would have assumed that considering they're still rocking Charlie Coyle and Pavel Zacha headed into the playoffs, they had to have been making calls about a player like Hertl. So a huge ad for Vegas. Really love this move for them. They also, of course, make the Noah Hannafin deal, which is just still an interesting one for me, for mostly for Calgary. I mean, Calgary gets Daniil Miramanov, a 2026 first, and a conditional second or conditional third, which becomes a second if Vegas wins a round. This was originally a 2025 first, but of course the condition on that was that if they made another deal with or involving their 2025 first, it became that 2026 first, that 2025 first round, obviously going to San Jose for Hertl. So Calgary getting a first in a couple years, plus Miramanov, plus a third, probably a second. It's not a terrible return for them. Very likely that Noah Hannafin resigns in Vegas, so this is another really strong move for them. And then the last one is the Anthony Mantha edition. As a Caps fan, I kind of like this both ways. It's 50% return, which is good for Vegas. He'll slot in as a good depth winger for them. They suddenly have some pretty decent size up front, which is not going to be fun to play against if you're another Pacific Division team. And then, of course, they send a 2024 second and 2026 fourth back to Washington in exchange for Mantha for the Caps. I kind of like that because we're selling fairly high on a guy that is, for large parts of his tenure in Washington, not been all that successful. This has probably been his best year as a Capital. And of course, GMBM capitalizes on that and gets rid of him at a pretty decent price. Moving on to Tampa Bay. Tampa didn't make any real big splashes. They acquire both Matt Dumba and Anthony Duclair, as well as two seventh-round picks in exchange for a 2027 fifth for Jack Thompson and for a 2024 third. Again, really nothing major here for Tampa. They're definitely going to be an interesting team to watch down the stretch. Vasilevsky struggling a bit. Kucherov kind of carrying all of the weight of this team right now, so we'll see what they can do. It's good little depth adds to make for them. Dumba, of course, previously had some pretty good offensive upside. We'll see if being around some of these guys reawakens that. I could see him being on power play too for them, considering the absence of Mikhail Sergachev. So we'll see what happens there. I don't hate either of these moves. As usual, Tampa always finds a way to do something that's pretty sneakily good, and I think this is probably going to be inclusive of that. Really quickly, the only move for Boston I think I'm talking about today is the Peak deal. I really don't understand this one, and I think pretty much everyone's in unison here. This is a guy that was probably going to get bought out by the Blue Jackets, which is saying something. And Boston sends Jacob Zaboral in a 2027 third to acquire him. He will be depth on the blue line. Maybe they think this is kind of a reclamation project that they can kind of help regain his confidence, but it's not been a good year for him. He's been scratched for like 40 games, so definitely an interesting move for the Bruins. I would say Columbus probably wins this one just because of what I just mentioned, but we'll see. Maybe Boston's got something up their sleeve. The Philadelphia Flyers. So we'll talk about again the winners and losers later on in the video, but I don't mind what Philly did in this deadline at all. So they acquire Eric Johnson from Buffalo for a fourth. That, of course, becoming more possible after they acquire Bowen Byram. They also get Dennis Gurianov in exchange for Wade Allison, which is kind of a whatever deal for me. I don't love it. I don't hate it. Gurianov's a guy that has the talent. It's just never really paid off for him in the NHL. And Wade Allison's a guy that's struggled to find a good fit in Philly. So I think this is probably a good deal for both of those players. A change of scenery for both could be one of the things that sparks one, hopefully both of their times on their new teams. And then, of course, the biggest one for Philly is the Sean Walker deal. They get rid of Walker and a 2026 fifth for Ryan Johansson and a conditional first, which is top 10 protected. Now, bringing on Johansson's salary is not great. They've taken on a couple of these bad contracts now. Of course, the Cal Peterson one comes top of mind, but I don't mind getting rid of Walker in this situation, and I think using it to confirm that first round pick is a really good move by Danny Briere. I know, again, a lot of fans are going to look at the Johansson contract and say, that's not great, but Walker was a guy that was probably never going to end up in Philly long term. So I think getting the first for him, you put yourself in a position where they're still able to stay in the hunt while also kind of playing the long game and picking up picks. So I kind of like what Philly did pretty quietly here, but that was the extent of their moves. The other or second of the three big moves for New Jersey is, of course, Jake Allen in exchange for a conditional third. That third becomes a second if he both plays 40 games in the 2024-25 season and the Devils make the playoffs. So it's kind of a coin flip as of now, whether or not that'll be the case. If the plan is to have Allen be the backup next year, that's still kind of up in the air because whether or not he plays 40 games as a backup, TBD, unless someone gets hurt. But if he is the backup, that means someone like Markstrom, Allmark, Saros, etc., probably got brought in, and that means their odds of making the playoffs accentuate, that much more. So we'll see what that means for the Devils and for Jake Allen. I don't love this one really all that much. Again, I'm not a huge fan of Jake Allen's game, but we'll see what happens there. Jason Zucker to the Preds for a 2024 sixth. I don't really know exactly what the Preds are thinking on this one. He hasn't exactly been fantastic for Arizona. He has a massive contract hit for a guy that's really not doing all too much. So a bit of a head scratcher there. We'll see if maybe, again, like the Boston deal, Nashville's got something up their sleeve that we don't know about, but not a huge fan of this one. For Nashville, for Arizona, they, of course, get the contract off the books, so I guess they will take that. Tyler Toffoli to the Jets from New Jersey in exchange for a 2025 second and a 2025 third. Again, I'm not exactly sure what the plan is here from Tom Fitzgerald. Considering Toffoli's been arguably your best offensive player, I know Jack Hughes has been hurt, but just statistically has been the best offensive player for the Devils. On pace for probably 35 goals, and you don't get a first rounder back for him. It's just a little bit befuddling to me, but a great deal for Cheveldayoff. Of course, they add some really, really strong depth through this deadline, and I think they're in a very good position to contend. But for New Jersey, just, again, a bit of a head scratcher for me. For Florida, not really any crazy splashes here either. They add Okposo in exchange for, I'm going to butcher this, Callie Jalen, maybe, and a conditional 2024 seventh. It becomes a fifth if the Panthers win the Stanley Cup. So a minor deal here. Okposo adds some good depth for them. He's a good veteran, good role player. It's going to be a good fit, I think, for him in Florida. And, of course, gives him a chance to chase the cup. He's played, I think, 22 playoff games in his career, and he's played over 1,000 regular season games. So good to see him get a chance on a team that looks to be in very good shape to contend to make a very deep run. They, of course, also make the Tarasenko deal, 50% retained in exchange for a 2025 third and a conditional 2024 fourth, which becomes a third if Florida wins the cup. So, I mean, this deal sucks for Ottawa if we're just being honest. I mean, Tarasenko had the Sens by the balls. He has the full no move clause. Says, I am only going to Florida, and this is what happens when that deal happens. Tarasenko does not have the value he used to, but nonetheless, you definitely could have gotten more for a player like Tank. So it's unfortunate for the Sens, but it's a great pickup, I think, for the Panthers. Evgeny Kuznetsov going to Carolina, 50% retained from Washington in exchange for a 2025 third. This one's a bit of a head scratcher for the Canes. I mean, we know the talent that Kuzi can have, but he's, of course, been going through it in Washington for a while. I know this kind of irons out their forward depth quite a good bit, but just I don't love it for the Canes. I think there's a lot of risk here. Maybe they think they can isolate him and kind of make sure that he A doesn't get himself into trouble, and B maybe they think they can get him to put a bit more effort in. I don't know. If that's the case, this team is going to be a monster in the East, and good luck beating them because they look like an all-star team down and up the lineup. But without that and like having the risk involved, I don't really love it. Now, of course, the Jake Gensel deal for Carolina, I love this one. I think everyone that's a Canes fan is drooling over this, and if you're a Penguins fan, you're probably not all too happy. They also get Ty Smith in this deal, which is kind of just an add-on. Smith has been tossed around to a couple teams now and has never really panned out. Maybe he can in Carolina, but doubtful on that. The return here: Michael Bunting, Ville Koivunen, Vasily Ponomarev, Kruz Lucius, a conditional 2024 first, and a 2024 fifth if the Canes win the Stanley Cup. The condition on the first being that it becomes a second if the Canes don't make it to the Cup final. So over a 50-50 shot that that's a second round pick instead of a first round pick. As far as the players go, Michael Bunting, we kind of know what he is. Has had kind of a struggling year in Carolina. I don't mind seeing him get moved, reunited with Kyle Dubas, oddly enough. And then Ville Koivunen, Vasily Ponomarev, and Kruz Lucius. Ponomarev is a good leader. We've seen that from his experience in the World Juniors. And then for Koivunen, or I guess not the World Juniors, but international play. For Koivunen and Kruz Lucius, I think I probably like Lucius as the highest ceiling of these prospects. I think he's about a point per game in the NCAA right now, so that's always pretty impressive. Ville Koivunen, of course, has some decent upside too, so it's not the worst return. I know they're looking at the picks saying we didn't get a first. It's terrible. I don't think it's as bad as a lot of people are making it out to be, but it's definitely not what it could have been for a guy who's like one of the best goal scoring paces in the playoffs ever. Like this guy has ice in his veins every damn year he makes it to the dance. So we'll see what happens here for the Canes. I don't hate it for the Penguins. I don't love it. It definitely could have been better for the Canes. The Kuzi deal is a weird one, but I love the Gensel deal. I think it makes them way, way, way more scary in a deep round series. The Colorado Avalanche. So this is another team that made a massive splash in the in the trade deadline here. They acquire Yakov Trenin, Brandon Duhaime, Sean Walker, and Casey Middlestat in exchange for basically a 2025 second, a 2026 third, what we talked about in the Johansson for Walker deal, and then they give out Bowen Byram in exchange for Casey Middlestat 1-for-1. So all in all, adding some solid forward depth, you finally pick up that pure second line center who's got, 60-ish point pace pretty much every year, which is what they're looking for. Sean Walker over Bo Byram, I think, is just a pure upgrade based on their needs, at least. He can play the game that the Avs want to play. He plays with some good pace. Duhaime and Trenin, good depth options. They have a really, really nice pool of bottom six players now available to them, which is going to be great for the playoffs because injuries always find a way to happen. So the Avs put themselves in really good shape here, and frankly, I don't mind any of the assets they gave up, and they get the Johansson contract off their books. So I think of all of the teams in this trade deadline, it's between Vegas and the Avs that are really my two biggest winners. But again, we'll talk about that more in a bit. The Edmonton Oilers, basically Troy Stetcher, Adam Henrique, and Sam Carrick, plus some extra pieces in exchange for their 2024 first, 2025 fourth, and 2027 fourth round picks. The give up and the return isn't terrible here, but I think Edmonton fans are probably going to have wanted them to make one more, at least middle of the road move here. Adam Henrique is a good addition. He's obviously going to provide some value to the Oilers. I just think that there's probably another forward, maybe another winger you wanted to throw into that mix. I know the wing market kind of dried up pretty quickly, but looking at someone like, I don't know if O'Reilly Smith would have been a fit here, but that could have been something that was worth looking at. Max Pacioretty, not a terrible option there either. So some options there that just didn't end up happening that I think could have been nice additions for the Oilers. It doesn't happen. It's not the worst deadline by any means, but I feel like it just leaves a little bit to be desired if you're an Oilers fan. The only real moves the Leafs made, Joel Edmondson and Ilya Lyubushkin, both joining them in exchange for 2/3, a fifth, and a sixth, basically, which I think is a massive overpayment for depth defensemen. They also add Connor Dewar, which I think is fine. They probably like having that extra forward depth, but all in all, I don't know how much it makes the team better. It definitely makes them tougher. It makes them harder to play, a little bit more structured like a playoff team. I just don't know that it gets them across the line that teams like Florida, like the Hurricanes, like even the Rangers didn't add much, but I probably like the Rangers deadline better than I like the Leafs. So we'll see what happens. I could be very wrong considering the talent they have up front, the talent they've had the last 7 years, but what have they gotten with the last 7 years? We know already. So, not a huge fan of what the Leafs did, but nonetheless, we'll see what happens come playoff time. Speaking of the Rangers, really only two moves to be noted of here. Alex Wennberg, 50% retained for a 2024 second and a 2025 fourth. That fourth coming from the Dallas deal for Niels Lundqvist. So, if Lundqvist gets 55 plus points in his first 2 years, it becomes a third. For Roslovic, he's also 50% retained. It's a conditional 2026 fourth. And if they make it to the Cup final, he plays half of those games in the playoffs. It becomes a third. So I don't hate either of these deals. I think they're in a similar boat to the Oilers. You would have liked to have seen them make probably one more move again. Pacioretty, I think, would have been a really good fit here for the Rangers. Plays a pretty similar game, maybe a bit less physical to Blake Wheeler. Of course, they're both getting up there in age, so neither as physical as they used to be, but similar enough that it probably fits the mold that the Rangers were looking for. They weren't able to get it done. Pacioretty stays in Washington. So again, leaving just a bit to be desired. I think the Canes are far and away the strongest team out of the East from this trade deadline, barring the question mark in goal has always been the issue for them, right? But Freddie Anderson's come back. We'll see if he can stay healthy. So again, leaving a bit to be desired for Rangers fans, but that's their deadline. And I think that was actually all of the notable trades that I wanted to go through. So again, we've talked on kind of my winners and losers in some of these deals, but we'll go through the losers first. Again, New Jersey, I don't fully understand what they were going for in it. And I think the way that they managed Tyler Toffoli was pretty god awful, if I'm being completely honest. The Penguins, again, kind of a lackluster return for Jake Gensel. And I think you probably could have done away with some other pieces just to get some other assets into your pool, kind of strengthen that. I don't want to say like they're never going to go to a full rebuild as long as they have Crosby, Malkin, and Letang, but I think just getting some more longer term assets probably would have been better for them. Getting a name like Riley Smith, maybe even an Alex Nedeljkovic off of their books for some picks or some prospects could have been a decent move. They don't do that. The Nashville Predators, who I didn't really talk about aside from the Jason Zucker deal, I don't love that they're looking to like kind of add in this trade deadline. They're in a weird spot where they're young-ish, but I don't think they're young enough with the talent to continue to grow yet over the next couple of years. So their lack of making moves to sell a bit, at least, was kind of surprising to me. Again, they're probably going to make the playoffs, so I understand why they did what they did. But as a fan and as a third-party observer, I just don't love their lack of moves. Really, one of the more quiet teams this deadline, and I was expecting them to be a bit busier. Um, Boston, another one. Center depth is still there for them, the lack of it. They are going into the playoffs with Saka and Coyle as their 1 and 2, and I just don't love that. They've proven that they can be good enough. They're obviously still playing perfectly fine in the regular season, but I think playoffs is obviously a different breed. Those are both big guys. It's not like they can't play playoff style hockey. I just think it would have been really nice for them to add a guy like Tomas Hertl. Would have been a perfect fit. He would have taken over that first line center role come playoffs. And I think this Bruins team becomes that much scarier with a guy like that. If they don't pick that player up, we'll see what happens. I could be completely wrong. Boston, of course, has been quite strong all year, but I just don't love that they didn't go out and make a move like that to bolster themselves down the middle. And then again, the Oilers and Rangers, I kind of listed both of these teams. I don't think they did quite enough to make the difference for the Oilers in the West. You got teams like the Avs, the Golden Knights, the Stars, the Jets. Like all of these teams made some pretty significant changes to their rosters. And then for the Rangers, kind of the same deal. There's less competition as far as teams that made moves, but like the Panthers made some quality ones, and I think already have a slightly better roster. The Hurricanes, of course, some big splashes. So both teams in this spot where I think they probably would have benefited from making maybe one more move and really going all in, and I just don't think either GM did quite enough to get there. Now, my winners, kind of similar stories here, right? The Avs add really everything except the new goalie. I think their plan for now is to go with Justus Annunen and, of course, Alex Georgiev heading into the playoffs. Juiced has been playing better over the last couple weeks, so we'll see if that works out. TBD. Next is Philly again. They're not really a true winner. They don't add a huge piece that's going to make them drastically better, but I think they put themselves in a position to stay in a hunt for the playoffs. I don't think they're looking to completely bottom out. John Tortorella's got this team in a spot where they make the most of what they have, and it works out fantastically for them. So I really like that for Philly. And I think this allows them to both, again, stay in the hunt and play the long game as far as trying to continue to build up their youthful talent. So I think all in all, pretty good for the Flyers. Of course, I didn't talk about the Jamie Drysdale trade, but that's really the arguably biggest move they've made all year if you discount the Sean Walker trade. Neither here nor there. I like what Philly did. For Vegas, I don't know how they do this every year. Every year they're in on every single big name. And then this year it's a name that really wasn't even talked about all that much. And they surprise everyone at the 11th hour with this massive trade that was probably the biggest trade of the entire deadline season. Um, they're back again. If Aiden Hill can be consistent, or Logan Thompson, or whoever, maybe they throw a new goalie into the playoffs this year. Why not? I don't know. But their roster up front, on the defense, on the back end, like everything Vegas has right now is just so good. So obviously they're one of, if not the biggest winner. This is one that doesn't get talked about a lot, but I think both the Ducks and Sharks, they offloaded a lot of the assets that made sense for them. And I think in pretty much every case, they got solid returns. I think for the Ducks, it was a good move not moving off of Trevor Zegras. I think for the Sharks, hanging on to a guy like Mike Hoffman, not moving Mackenzie Blackwood, probably better than not moving Capo Kakinen, if that makes sense. Just some of the stuff they made, or I guess more of the moves they didn't make, made those teams, as bad as they're still going to be. I'm not saying their teams improved by any means. I just think from an asset management standpoint that those two GMs did a pretty solid job of getting what they should be getting for the pieces they moved and not moving any pieces that were going to be really detrimental to their plan over the next 3-4 years. And then the last two teams, the Stars and Jets, both made their moves kind of quietly. The Stars, of course, the Chris Tanev, deal earlier in the week. Obviously, their biggest addition, but I think for them, the one thing that they did that I really like, similar to the Ducks and Sharks, actually, is that they didn't go out and like force moves. They have a young enough roster, I think, that they can kind of settle in with what they have now. And arguably the biggest addition for them, aside, of course, from Chris Tanev, is bringing Logan Stankoven into this team in the last couple weeks has been a spark, and he looks fantastic. So, not moving off of anything crazy for them, I think puts them in a really good spot. Their roster's already really, really good, comfortable with their goaltending, more comfortable with their defense now that they had Chris Tanev, and of course, a slew of depth up front. This team's going to be a pain in the ass, to put it bluntly, in the playoffs. And then similarly, the last of my winners is Winnipeg. Quiet additions. I mean, the Toffoli trade's kind of a big splash, and then Sean Monahan earlier in the year. Both moves that just add some depth up front that they really felt like they were lacking starting the year, and suddenly they look like this true bona fide contender. The defense has been really strong all year, as long as Connor Hellebuck or Laurent Brossoit, they've both been very good. As long as one of them are healthy and playing well headed into the playoffs, this is not a team that you want to play in the first round. And to that point, all of the Avs, Stars, and Jets, I mean, whoever finishes 2-3 in the Central is in for an absolute 7-game war in that first round. I will be tuning into every single one of those games because they're going to be dogfights. They're going to be mean. It's going to be physical. There's going to be a ton of talent on the ice. It's going to be really, really fun to watch, and this trade deadline only adds to that. So that is it for what I wanted to cover today, my winners and losers. Let me know what you guys think in the comments section down below. How do you think your team fared? For the teams I didn't cover, again, I apologize. These were the moves I felt were kind of most notable, most important heading into the playoffs. So again, let me know what you guys think. Looking forward to this final month stretch down toward the playoffs. Leave a like if you enjoyed this video. Subscribe if you really liked it. It is free, and we will talk to you guys tonight for the recap and tomorrow morning for the power ranking.